Chapter 1. Early Life and Political Foundations. John Adams was born on October 30th, 1735, in the small town of Braintree, Massachusetts, a community that would later be renamed Quincy in his honor. His family was of modest means. His father, John Adams Sr., was a shoemaker and farmer who valued education and hard work, instilling these principles in his children. His mother, Susanna Boylston Adams, was known for her intelligence and strong moral character. Growing up in this environment of diligence and discipline, young John developed a keen interest in learning from an early age. Adams's early education was marked by exceptional academic ability. He attended the local village school where he demonstrated a remarkable aptitude for reading and mathematics. Recognizing his potential, his parents encouraged him to pursue higher education. At the age of 15, he entered Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts, an institution that would shape his intellectual development profoundly. During his time at Harvard, Adams immersed himself in classical studies, rhetoric, philosophy, and law. He was an outstanding student, known for his sharp mind and insatiable curiosity. After graduating from Harvard in 1755 at the age of 19 with a Bachelor of Arts degree, Adams initially considered pursuing a career in law, but also contemplated other paths. He apprenticed under local lawyers to learn the legal profession thoroughly. His dedication to studying law was intense. He devoured legal texts and philosophy, developing a reputation as an intelligent and principled thinker. In 1758, Adams was admitted to the Massachusetts bar at the age of 23. His legal career quickly gained momentum due to his meticulous preparation and persuasive speaking skills. He became known for his integrity and commitment to justice, traits that would define his political philosophy throughout his life. Adams' early political beliefs were shaped by the tumultuous environment of colonial America under British rule. The colonies faced increasing taxation without representation, most notably exemplified by the Stamp Act of 1765, and other restrictions that fueled resentment among colonists who believed their rights as Englishmen were being violated. Adams was deeply committed to the principles of liberty and self-governance. He believed that colonists should have a voice in their government and that their rights should be protected against arbitrary authority. His involvement in local politics began with his participation in town meetings and legal cases defending colonial rights. He became an active member of the Massachusetts Assembly, the colonial legislature, where he voiced opposition to British policies that infringed upon colonial autonomy. His reputation as a fierce—
In addition to his legal work and political activism within Massachusetts, Adams became involved with broader colonial efforts, advocating for independence. He joined committees that coordinated resistance against British policies and contributed to the growing movement toward independence by articulating arguments rooted in natural law and constitutional principles. Adams' political philosophy was heavily influenced by Enlightenment ideas circulating across Europe, particularly those emphasizing individual rights, separation of powers, social contract theory, and republicanism. Thinkers like John Locke profoundly impacted him. Locke's writings on government's role as a protector of natural rights, life, liberty, and property, inspired Adams's belief that governments derive their legitimacy from the consent of the governed. Throughout this period, leading up to the American Revolution, Adams distinguished himself not only as a skilled lawyer, but also as an articulate advocate for colonial rights. His reputation as a principled patriot grew when he defended British soldiers involved in the Boston Massacre, 1770, demonstrating his commitment to justice even when it was unpopular among many colonists who viewed British soldiers with suspicion or hostility. As tensions escalated toward revolution, Adams emerged as one of the most prominent voices advocating for independence. He served on various committees, drafting petitions and resolutions asserting colonial grievances against Britain. His deep understanding of law and constitutional principles made him an influential figure among revolutionary leaders. In 1770, Adams married Abigail Smith, a highly intelligent woman whose own education and moral strength complemented his own ideals. Their partnership would prove vital throughout his political career. Abigail's support provided emotional stability amid turbulent times. By the time he became involved with the Continental Congress in 1774, serving as a delegate from Massachusetts, Adams had established himself as one of America's leading revolutionary thinkers. His early life had been characterized by rigorous education, unwavering commitment to liberty, mastery of law and rhetoric, and active participation in local politics, all foundational elements that would shape his approach to leadership during America's fight for independence. In summary, John Adams's early life laid a solid groundwork built on education, moral conviction, legal expertise, and political activism rooted in Enlightenment ideals. These experiences fostered a deep sense of duty toward defending individual rights and establishing a government based on consent, a vision that would guide him through some of the most challenging moments in American history.
Chapter 2. The Election of 1796 and Ascension to the Presidency. The election of 1796 was a pivotal moment in American history, marking the first time that the young nation faced the complexities of electoral politics under the newly ratified Constitution. It was a contest that not only determined who would lead the United States, but also tested the fragile political institutions and set precedents for future elections. In the years following George Washington's unanimous election in 1788 and his subsequent re-election in 1792, the country had enjoyed a period of relative stability. Washington's leadership had helped establish federal authority and set important precedents for executive conduct. However, as his presidency drew to a close, political factions began to coalesce into organized parties, most notably the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, and the Democratic Republicans, also called Jeffersonian Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. John Adams, a prominent Federalist and one of Washington's closest allies, emerged as a leading candidate for president. His reputation as a principled statesman, diplomat, and advocate for strong federal authority made him an attractive choice for Federalist supporters. Adams' political career up to that point had been marked by significant achievements. He served as vice president under Washington from 1789 to 1797, was instrumental in drafting foundational documents like the Massachusetts Constitution, which served as a model for other states, and had gained respect for his diplomatic skills during his service in Europe. The election process at that time was different from today's system. Instead of a direct popular vote determining the president, electors chosen by state legislatures cast ballots for their preferred candidates. Each elector cast 2 votes. The candidate with the most votes became president, and the runner-up became vice president. This system often resulted in members of opposing parties becoming president and vice president, a situation that would soon prove problematic. In 1796, both Adams and Jefferson ran as their respective parties' candidates. Adams was seen as a steady, experienced leader committed to Federalist principles, favoring a strong central government, close ties with Britain, and policies that supported commerce and industry. Jefferson represented the Democratic-Republican vision, advocating for states' rights, an agrarian economy, and sympathies toward revolutionary France.
The campaign was intense, but relatively restrained compared to modern standards. However, underlying tensions were high. Federalists portrayed Jefferson as too radical or sympathetic to France's revolutionary ideals, while Jeffersonian Republicans accused Adams of being too elitist or overly cautious about foreign entanglements. When voting concluded in late 1796, Adams narrowly secured victory, with 71 electoral votes out of 138 cast nationwide. Jefferson received 68 votes, just behind Adams, making him the runner-up. Under the electoral rules then in place, Jefferson became vice president, a situation that would soon cause complications, given their opposing political views. Adams's victory made him the second president of the United States. His ascension to office was marked by both pride and concern. He recognized that leading a nation still defining its identity would be an immense challenge. His inauguration took place on March 4, 1797, a ceremony held at Congress Hall in Philadelphia, the temporary capital before Washington, D.C. In his inaugural address, Adams emphasized national unity and urged Americans to work together despite partisan differences. Adams inherited an increasingly divided nation facing external threats from European powers embroiled in conflicts like the ongoing French Revolution and wars between Britain and France. Internally, partisan tensions threatened domestic stability, particularly over issues such as foreign policy alignment and civil liberties. One immediate challenge was managing relations with France. The French Revolution had begun in 1789 with ideals of liberty, but soon devolved into chaos and violence. France's revolutionary government viewed America's neutrality with suspicion. Meanwhile, Britain continued its naval blockade against France while supporting American trade interests through treaties like Jay's Treaty, 1794. These complex diplomatic circumstances created tensions that would define Adams's presidency. Furthermore, domestic politics grew increasingly polarized. The Federalists sought to strengthen federal authority and maintain good relations with Britain. They believed this approach was essential for economic growth and national security. Conversely, Democratic Republicans favored closer ties with France and championed states' rights, views that often clashed with Federalist policies. Adams's election also revealed underlying regional divides. New England supported Federalist policies. Southern states were more divided but generally leaned toward Republican ideals. Western frontier regions were still developing politically, but tended to favor stability over radical change. Despite these challenges, Adams aimed to uphold national unity while navigating treacherous diplomatic waters. His presidency would be characterized by
Despite these challenges, Adams aimed to uphold national unity while navigating treacherous diplomatic waters. His presidency would be characterized by efforts to balance internal party interests with external threats, a task complicated by personal convictions and political pressures. In summary, the election of 1796 was more than just choosing a leader. It was an early test of America's constitutional system under new electoral rules. John Adams's narrow victory reflected both his stature as an experienced statesman and the deepening partisan divisions within American politics. His ascension marked a transition from Washington's era of consensus toward a more contentious political landscape, one that would shape American governance for decades to come. Chapter 3: Inauguration and Initial Challenges. The inauguration of John Adams as the second President of the United States took place on March 4, 1797, in Philadelphia, which was then serving as the temporary capital of the nation. This event marked a significant milestone in American history, not only because it was the first peaceful transfer of power between elected leaders under the new Constitution, but also because it set important precedents for future inaugurations and presidential conduct. The day of the inauguration was marked by a sense of solemnity and hope. The weather was typical for early March, cool and crisp, yet the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. A large crowd gathered at Congress Hall to witness the ceremony. Adams, dressed in formal attire befitting his status, arrived with dignity and resolve. His inaugural address was brief but impactful. He emphasized themes of national unity, stability, and the importance of adhering to the Constitution's principles. He urged Americans to put aside partisan differences and work together for the common good, recognizing that the young nation faced numerous internal and external challenges. Following his swearing-in, Adams took office at a time when the United States was grappling with complex foreign policy issues. The country's neutrality in ongoing European conflicts, particularly between Britain and France, was under strain. Both nations sought to influence American policy to their advantage, leading to diplomatic tensions that threatened to escalate into war. One of Adams's immediate challenges was managing relations with France. Since the French Revolution had begun in 1789, France had undergone radical changes, from initial support for revolutionary ideals to violent upheaval and dictatorship under Robespierre. The revolutionary government viewed America's neutrality as a betrayal, especially after Jay's treaty with Britain, 1794, which angered France by seeming to favor British interests. French agents began seizing American ships trading with Britain.
In response, Adams faced a difficult decision, whether to escalate military preparations or seek peaceful resolution. He believed strongly in diplomacy, but recognized that France's actions threatened American sovereignty and economic interests. To address this crisis, Adams appointed a special commission to negotiate with France, a move that would later be known as the XYZ Affair. The XYZ Affair involved secret negotiations where French agents, referred to only as X, Y, and Z, demanded bribes and concessions before formal talks could proceed. When news of these demands became public in 1798, it caused widespread outrage across America. The incident fueled anti-French sentiment and led to an unofficial naval buildup known as the Quasi-War, a limited naval conflict fought primarily at sea between American and French ships. Domestically, Adams faced opposition from within his own party and from political rivals who accused him of being too cautious or weak in handling foreign threats. The Federalists supported a strong navy and military preparedness. They believed that defending American interests required assertive action against French aggression. Conversely, Democratic Republicans favored diplomacy over military confrontation and warned against provoking war. Another initial challenge for Adams was managing domestic political divisions that threatened national stability. The partisan rivalry between Federalists and Democratic Republicans intensified during his presidency. Federalists accused Jeffersonian Republicans of sympathizing with revolutionary France or undermining national security through their opposition to strong federal policies. Furthermore, Adams had to navigate issues related to civil liberties,
amid growing fears of foreign influence and internal dissent. The passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798 exemplified this tension. These laws aimed to suppress criticism of the government, but also raised concerns about free speech rights enshrined in the First Amendment. Economically, the young nation faced difficulties stemming from debts incurred during the Revolutionary War and ongoing trade disruptions caused by European conflicts. Efforts were underway to stabilize commerce, establish tariffs, and promote economic growth, all vital for securing America's financial independence. In addition to these political and diplomatic challenges, Adams also grappled with personal pressures. As a leader stepping into Washington's shadow, he felt both honor and burdened responsibility. His reputation depended on how effectively he managed crises at home and abroad, while maintaining public confidence.
Throughout his early months in office, Adams demonstrated qualities of prudence, patience, and resolve. He prioritized diplomacy but prepared for possible conflict if necessary. His administration worked tirelessly behind closed doors to negotiate peace with France while strengthening naval defenses, actions that would eventually lead to an informal peace treaty. In summary, President John Adams' inauguration marked not just a formal transfer of power, but also an entry into a presidency fraught with formidable challenges. From managing foreign relations strained by revolutionary upheavals abroad to navigating domestic partisan conflicts at home, Adams faced an uncertain path ahead. His initial efforts laid the groundwork for how future presidents would handle crises, balancing diplomacy with preparedness, and underscored the importance of steady leadership during turbulent times. Chapter 4: Foreign Policy and the XYZ Affair. In the early years of John Adams' presidency, one of the most pressing and complex issues he faced was navigating the treacherous waters of foreign policy. The young nation was caught in the midst of European conflicts that threatened its sovereignty, economic stability, and security. The most significant diplomatic crisis during this period was the XYZ affair, a scandal that not only intensified tensions with France, but also had profound implications for American foreign policy and domestic politics. The roots of the crisis lay in the ongoing European wars sparked by the French Revolution. France, which had initially supported American independence, was now embroiled in revolutionary upheaval and subsequent wars with Britain, Austria, Prussia, and other European powers. The United States sought to maintain neutrality, an essential principle established by President Washington's farewell address. Yet this stance proved increasingly difficult to uphold, as both Britain and France sought to sway American policy in their favor. Britain's naval blockade against France and its impressment of American sailors created significant economic and diplomatic tensions. Meanwhile, France viewed America's neutrality as a betrayal, especially after the signing of Jay's Treaty with Britain in 1794. The treaty angered France because it appeared to favor British interests over French ones, leading revolutionary France to see America as an unreliable ally or even an enemy. In this tense environment, President Adams aimed to protect American interests through diplomacy rather than war. He appointed a special commission to negotiate with France, comprising Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, Elbridge Gerry, and John Marshall, hoping to resolve disputes peacefully. However, when these envoys arrived in Paris in 1797, they encountered a diplomatic atmosphere fraught with hostility. Throughout this crisis, President Adams demonstrated restraint and prudence, despite mounting pressure from his party members who favored warlike measures. His decision not to seek outright war with France preserved peace temporarily, but also drew criticism from those who believed stronger action was necessary. In summary, the XYZ affair was a defining moment in early American foreign policy that tested the nation's ability to navigate international conflicts
while maintaining its principles of neutrality and sovereignty. It exposed vulnerabilities in diplomatic relations with revolutionary France and prompted significant military preparedness measures that would shape U.S. foreign policy for years to come. The scandal also underscored how international crises could influence domestic politics, fueling patriotism on one side while raising fears about foreign influence on the other, and highlighted President Adams's leadership style, cautious yet firm in defending national interests. Chapter 5. The Quasi-War and Naval Expansion. Following the XYZ affair and the subsequent deterioration of diplomatic relations with France, the United States found itself embroiled in an undeclared naval conflict known as the Quasi-War. This period, spanning from 1798 to 1800, was characterized by heightened tensions at sea, increased naval activity, and significant shifts in American foreign policy and military preparedness. The Quasi-War was not a formal war declared by Congress, but rather an undeclared naval conflict that tested the young nation's resolve and capacity to defend its interests. The origins of the Quasi-War can be traced directly to the fallout from the XYZ affair. The American public's outrage over French demands for bribes and tribute created a climate of hostility toward France. President John Adams, committed to protecting American sovereignty without plunging into full-scale war, sought to respond with a combination of diplomatic efforts and military readiness. Congress supported this approach by authorizing measures to bolster national defense. One of the most significant responses was the rapid expansion of the U.S. Navy. Prior to this period, the United States had a relatively small and poorly equipped navy, primarily used for coastal defense and limited maritime operations. However, the crisis with France revealed the urgent need for a more robust naval force capable of protecting American shipping interests and deterring French aggression on the high seas. In 1798, Congress passed legislation that authorized the construction of several warships, most notably 6 frigates, designed for combat at sea. These ships were among the first significant naval vessels built by the United States and marked a turning point in American maritime military policy. The most famous among them was the USS Constitution. The naval expansion was driven by several strategic considerations. First, American merchant ships faced frequent attacks from French privateers, privately owned vessels authorized by France to seize enemy ships, and other hostile vessels operating in Atlantic waters. Protecting commerce became a national priority because economic stability depended heavily on maritime trade. Second, establishing a capable navy served as a deterrent against further French attacks or interference. Although President Adams initially preferred diplomacy over military confrontation, he recognized that a credible naval force was essential for defending American interests and asserting sovereignty on the global stage. The Quasi-War itself consisted mainly of naval engagements between American ships and French vessels. Without declaring formal war, Congress authorized U.S. ships to seize French vessels in retaliation for French aggression against American shipping. This policy led to numerous skirmishes at sea, small but significant battles that demonstrated American resolve. One notable event during this period was the capture of several French privateers by U.S. Navy ships, which helped secure Atlantic trade routes and protect American economic interests. These actions also boosted morale among Americans who saw their fledgling navy as capable of defending national honor. The conflict also prompted improvements in naval tactics and technology. The U.S. Navy adopted new strategies for convoying merchant ships, blockading ports, and engaging enemy vessels more effectively. The experience gained during these engagements laid the groundwork for future maritime operations. Despite these military efforts, there was considerable debate within America about how to handle relations with France moving forward. Some Federalists advocated for an even more aggressive stance, calling for full-scale war, while others preferred continued diplomacy or limited military action. President Adams navigated this divide carefully. He believed that maintaining peace was paramount, but recognized that preparedness was necessary if diplomacy failed. The quasi-war came to an end with the signing of the Convention of 1800, also known as the Treaty of Montfontaine, which effectively terminated hostilities between France and America, without resolving all underlying issues, but restoring peace temporarily. Under this agreement, France agreed to cease attacks on American shipping, and both nations agreed to normalize diplomatic relations. The aftermath of this conflict had lasting effects on U.S. foreign policy and military development. It demonstrated that even a young nation could build.
Furthermore, the quasi-war contributed to domestic political shifts. Federalists gained support by emphasizing strong national defense measures. They argued that maintaining an active navy was essential for safeguarding American interests abroad. Conversely, Democratic Republicans remained cautious about increasing military spending and favored more diplomatic solutions. In summary, the quasi-war was a pivotal chapter in early American history that underscored the importance of naval power in asserting national sovereignty during times of international crisis. It marked America's transition from a primarily coastal nation with limited maritime capabilities to an emerging naval power prepared to defend its interests across oceans. The expansion of the Navy during this period laid critical foundations for future maritime conflicts and established principles that would guide U.S. foreign policy well into the 19th century. Chapter 6. Diplomatic Negotiations and the Treaty of Montfontaine. The period following the intense naval skirmishes of the quasi-war was marked by a concerted effort to restore peace and normalize relations between the United States and France. Despite the hostilities at sea, both nations recognized the importance of diplomatic resolution to avoid further conflict that could threaten stability and economic interests. This pursuit culminated in a series of diplomatic negotiations that ultimately led to the signing of the Treaty of Montfontaine in 1800, also known as the Convention of 1800. The origins of these negotiations can be traced back to the desire on both sides to end hostilities without resorting to full-scale war. For France, maintaining good relations with America was strategically important, especially as revolutionary France sought to consolidate its position amidst ongoing European conflicts. For the United States, ending the naval conflict was essential to protect its burgeoning maritime commerce and avoid unnecessary military expenditures. In 1799, President John Adams recognized that continued naval hostilities were unsustainable and sought to explore diplomatic avenues for peace. He appointed a special envoy, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, who had previously been involved in negotiations during the XYZ affair, along with other diplomats such as Elbridge Gerry and William Vans Murray. Their mission was to negotiate terms that would restore peaceful relations and resolve outstanding issues stemming from the quasi-war. The negotiations took place primarily in France, at a location called Mortefontaine, near Paris. The French government was represented by officials eager to re-establish diplomatic ties after years of tension. The key issues on the table included the cessation of French attacks on American shipping, compensation for damages incurred during hostilities, and the broader question of diplomatic recognition. One of the main objectives for American negotiators was to secure a formal end to hostilities without conceding too much influence or territory to France. Conversely, French officials aimed to restore their reputation after their aggressive privateering campaign against American vessels and sought to re-establish friendly relations with minimal concessions. The negotiations were complex and delicate. The American envoys faced pressure from domestic political factions, Federalists who favored a strong stance against France, and Democratic Republicans who preferred diplomacy, and had to balance these internal pressures with their diplomatic objectives. Meanwhile, French negotiators operated under their own strategic considerations amid ongoing European wars and internal political shift. After months of discussions in 1800, both sides reached an agreement that addressed their primary concerns. The resulting treaty, the Treaty of Mortefontaine, was signed on September 30th, 1800. Its key provisions included cessation of hostilities. Both nations agreed to cease all naval hostilities immediately. French privateers were instructed to stop attacking American ships, and American naval forces were directed to stand down from active engagement. Restoration of diplomatic relations. The treaty restored full diplomatic recognition between France and the United States. This was significant because it signaled a return to normal diplomatic channels after years of tension. Settlement of claims. France agreed to pay damages for ships seized during hostilities, a move aimed at addressing some economic grievances resulting from privateering activities. No formal alliance restored. Unlike earlier treaties, such as the Treaty of Alliance, 1778, which had allied France with America during the Revolutionary War, this treaty did not reinstate any formal military alliance or binding commitments beyond ending hostilities. Trade relations. While not explicitly detailed in all versions of the treaty, subsequent agreements facilitated renewed trade between both nations under mutually acceptable terms. The Treaty of Mortefontaine was significant for several reasons. It marked an end to active naval conflict between America and France without requiring either side to make major territorial or political concessions. It demonstrated America's ability to negotiate independently with European powers, a crucial step in asserting its sovereignty on the international stage. Furthermore, this treaty helped stabilize U.S.-French relations at a critical juncture when European conflicts threatened global stability. It also set a precedent for future diplomacy, highlighting that peaceful resolution through negotiation could be effective even amidst ongoing international tensions. Domestically, the treaty had mixed reactions. Federalists generally supported it because it avoided war and preserved national resources. They viewed it as a pragmatic solution that protected American interests without risking escalation into broader conflict. Democratic Republicans had mixed feelings. Some believed that more assertive action might have been necessary or desirable, but accepted the treaty as a practical outcome given circumstances. The successful negotiation also reinforced President Adams' reputation as a cautious but effective diplomat who prioritized peace over conflict, a stance that sometimes drew criticism from those advocating for more aggressive policies against France. In conclusion, the Treaty of Mortefontaine represented a pivotal moment in early American foreign policy, an example of diplomacy,
triumphing over potential military escalation. It underscored America's emerging role as an independent actor, capable of negotiating treaties on equal footing with European powers. The treaty not only ended immediate hostilities, but also laid groundwork for future international relations by demonstrating that peaceful negotiation could serve national interests effectively amid complex geopolitical challenges. Chapter 7. Domestic Politics. The Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. The early years of the United States were characterized by intense political debate and ideological rivalry between two foundational factions, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. These groups represented divergent visions for the future of the young nation, shaping domestic policy, foreign relations, and the very nature of American democracy. Their rivalry was rooted in differing interpretations of the Constitution, views on government power, economic policies, and attitudes toward foreign alliances. The Federalists, led by figures such as Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, and John Jay, championed a strong, centralized government. They believed that a robust federal authority was essential to maintain order, promote economic development, and ensure national stability. Hamilton's vision included a powerful national bank, assumption of state debts by the federal government, protective tariffs to foster industry, and close ties with Britain as a trading partner. The Federalists argued that a strong executive branch and a well-regulated economy would secure America's place as a respected nation on the world stage. In contrast, the Democratic Republicans, founded by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, advocated for limited federal power and greater emphasis on states' rights. They believed that too much central authority threatened individual liberties and the Republican ideals upon which America was founded. Jefferson's vision emphasized agrarianism. He saw independent farmers as the backbone of democracy and economic independence. The Democratic Republic. The rivalry between these factions manifested vividly in domestic policies and political debates during the 1790s. One of the earliest flashpoints was Hamilton's financial plan. His proposals to assume state debts, establish a national bank, and implement tariffs faced fierce opposition from Jefferson and Madison. The Democratic Republicans argued that such measures favored wealthy elites and threatened individual freedoms. They contended that constitutional powers should be narrowly interpreted to prevent an overly powerful federal government. This ideological divide extended into foreign policy issues as well. The Federalists generally supported Britain due to commercial interests and shared cultural ties, while Democratic Republicans leaned toward France because of their revolutionary ideals and alliance during the American Revolution. These differing allegiances created tensions within American politics, influencing policies such as the Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793, under President George Washington, a move supported by Federalists who wanted to avoid entangling alliances but opposed by Democratic Republicans who sympathized with revolutionary France. The emergence of political parties also led to organized campaigns for power at both state and national levels. The Federalists tended to draw support from merchants, urban professionals, and those favoring strong central authority. Conversely, Democratic Republicans found backing among farmers, rural populations, artisans, and those wary of concentrated government power. The election of 1796 exemplified these divisions when John Adams, a Federalist, became president, while Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, became vice president due to the electoral process at that time. This arrangement highlighted how party loyalties influenced governance. Adams' presidency faced opposition from Jefferson's faction within Congress. During Adams' administration, 1797–1801, domestic politics grew increasingly polarized. The passage of laws such as the Alien Acts and Sedition Act exemplified Federalist efforts to suppress dissent under claims of national security, but were viewed by opponents as violations of free speech and civil liberties. These laws fueled accusations that Federalists sought to undermine Republican principles in favor of authoritarian control. Meanwhile, Jefferson's supporters mobilized opposition through newspapers like the National Gazette, criticizing what they saw as federal overreach and corruption. This period marked one of the first significant uses of partisan media to shape public opinion, a practice that would become central to American politics.
The rivalry also influenced state-level politics. Different regions aligned with different factions based on economic interests and cultural values. For example, New England was predominantly Federalist due to its commercial economy tied closely with Britain, while southern states leaned Democratic-Republican because they prioritized agriculture and had closer ties with France. Despite their differences and sometimes bitter disputes, the two parties shared common goals: establishing a stable republic rooted in democratic principles while navigating complex international challenges. Their debates laid foundational ideas about constitutional interpretation, whether broad or strict, and about balancing federal authority with states' rights. Over time, these ideological conflicts shaped key policies, such as the development of infrastructure, roads and canals, education initiatives, military preparedness, the creation of a standing army, and responses to internal unrest, like the Whiskey Rebellion, 1794. The Whiskey Rebellion itself became a test case for federal authority. It demonstrated that the federal government, under Washington, could enforce laws against dissenters, an assertion supported by Federalists but opposed by many Democratic Republicans who viewed it as an overreach. By the early 19th century, these political factions evolved into more formalized parties. The Federalists, declining after their loss in 1800 with Thomas Jefferson's election, and laid groundwork for future political competition in America. Their rivalry fostered political engagement among citizens, but also led to polarization that sometimes threatened national unity. In summary, domestic politics during this formative period was characterized by profound ideological differences between Federalists, who favored strong central authority aligned with commercial interests and close ties with Britain, and Democratic Republicans, who championed states' rights, agrarian values, and support for revolutionary France. These competing visions shaped policies on finance, foreign relations, civil liberties, and governance itself,
debates that continue to influence American political discourse today.
Chapter 8. The Alien and Sedition Acts.
The late 1790s was a tumultuous period in American politics, marked by intense partisan rivalry, international tensions, and concerns over national security. In this climate of heightened anxiety, the Federalist-controlled Congress enacted a series of laws known collectively as the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. These laws aimed to suppress dissent, strengthen the federal government's authority, and address perceived threats from foreign enemies and domestic opponents. However, they also ignited fierce controversy and raised fundamental questions about civil liberties, free speech, and the limits of governmental power. The origins of the Alien and Sedition Acts can be traced to the escalating conflict between the United States and France during the Quasi-War at Sea. With France's revolutionary government increasingly hostile toward American ships, seizing vessels and disrupting trade, the Federalists sought measures to protect national security. Simultaneously, partisan tensions within the United States intensified as Democratic Republicans accused Federalists of undermining constitutional rights in their efforts to consolidate power. The Alien Acts consisted of 3 laws designed to control immigration and weaken political opposition. The Naturalization Act extended the residency requirement for American citizenship from 5 to 14 years, making it more difficult for immigrants, many of whom supported Democratic Republicans, to become citizens and vote. The Alien Friends Act authorized the president to deport or imprison non-citizens deemed dangerous during wartime or when national security was threatened. The Alien Enemies Act allowed for the detention or deportation of citizens from countries at war with the United States, initially targeting French nationals during the ongoing conflict. The Sedition Act, perhaps the most controversial component, criminalized any false, scandalous, or malicious criticism of the federal government or its officials. It aimed to silence opposition voices, particularly Republican newspapers that criticized President John Adams and his policies. Under this law, individuals could be prosecuted for expressing dissenting opinions about government actions or officials, effectively curbing free speech and press freedom. These laws were justified by Federalists as necessary measures to safeguard national security amid external threats and internal dissent. They argued that during wartime or national crisis, certain civil liberties could be temporarily restricted to protect the republic's stability. However, critics viewed them as blatant violations of constitutional rights, particularly freedom of speech and freedom of the press, as well as an attempt by Federalists to suppress political opposition. The passage of these acts sparked widespread outrage among Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. They contended that these laws were unconstitutional because they infringed upon fundamental rights guaranteed by the First Amendment. Jefferson famously articulated this opposition in his Kentucky Resolutions, asserting that states had the right to declare federal laws null and void if they believed those laws violated constitutional principles. Madison authored similar resolutions in Virginia. The enforcement of the Alien and Sedition Acts led to numerous prosecutions of Republican editors and politicians who criticized Federalist policies. Notably, newspapers such as the National Gazette faced legal action for publishing articles condemning Adams' administration. These prosecutions fueled accusations that Federalists were using government power to silence dissent, a tactic reminiscent of authoritarian regimes rather than a free republic. The political fallout from these laws deepened partisan divisions. Many Americans viewed them as an overreach, a betrayal of revolutionary ideals emphasizing liberty and limited government. The acts became a rallying point for Democratic Republicans who argued that they threatened individual freedoms and undermined democratic principles. In response to these laws, Jefferson and Madison organized opposition efforts that culminated in their drafting of resolutions asserting states' rights to oppose unconstitutional federal laws, a doctrine later associated with nullification. Although these resolutions did not have immediate legal effect, they set important precedents for states' resistance against federal overreach. The controversy surrounding the Alien and Sedition Acts also influenced subsequent elections. In 1800, Thomas Jefferson's victory over John Adams was partly fueled by widespread opposition to these laws. Jefferson campaigned on promises to restore civil liberties and reduce federal power, promises that resonated with many Americans who saw the acts as emblematic of Federalist tyranny. Eventually, public opinion turned against the Alien and Sedition Acts as their enforcement waned after Adams's presidency ended in 1801. The new Jefferson administration pardoned those convicted under the Sedition Act and repealed many provisions deemed unconstitutional or unnecessary. Despite their short-term impact, the Alien and Sedition Acts left a lasting legacy on American political history. They underscored tensions between security concerns and civil liberties, a debate that continues today, and highlighted how government powers can be expanded during times of crisis at the expense of individual rights. In summary, the Alien and Sedition Acts were a defining episode in early American politics, an attempt by Federalists to consolidate authority amid external threats, but one that provoked fierce resistance rooted in core constitutional principles. Their enactment revealed deep divisions within American society over how best to balance security with liberty, a debate that remains central to understanding American democracy. Chapter 9. The Election of 1800. The election of 1800 was one of the most significant and contentious political contests in early American history. It marked a pivotal moment in the young nation's development, testing the resilience of its democratic institutions and setting important precedents for future elections. This election was characterized by intense partisan rivalry, shifting political alliances, and a fierce debate over the direction of the country. Leading up to the election, the United States was experiencing rapid growth and change. The Federalists, led by President John Adams and Alexander Hamilton, favored a strong central government, close ties with Britain, and policies that supported commerce and industry. Conversely, the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, championed states' rights, an agrarian-based economy, and closer relations with France. These ideological differences fueled fierce political competition. The Federalists believed that stability and order depended on a strong federal government. They supported policies such as the Alien and Sedition Acts aimed at suppressing dissent and sought to strengthen the executive branch. The Democratic Republicans argued that such measures threatened individual liberties and feared that Federalist policies favored wealthy elites at the expense of common citizens. The campaign was marked by vigorous debates, propaganda, and personal attacks. Both sides used newspapers to sway public opinion. Federalists portrayed Jefferson as an atheist and revolutionary sympathizer who would undermine religion and stability. Democratic Republicans countered by criticizing Federalist policies as elitist and dangerous to liberty. A key issue in this election was the method of electing presidents. At that time, electors cast 2 votes without specifying a candidate for president or vice president, and the person with the most votes became president, while the runner-up became vice president. This system created potential problems when candidates from opposing parties received similar votes. In 1800, Thomas Jefferson and his running mate Aaron Burr both received an equal number of electoral votes, 73 each. leading to a constitutional crisis. Under existing laws, this tie had to be resolved by the House of Representatives. The House faced intense negotiations among Federalists and Democratic Republicans as they tried to determine who would become president. The Federalists controlled the House, but were divided over whom to support. Some Federalists preferred Burr because they believed he was more manageable or aligned with their interests. Others preferred Jefferson due to his experience and political philosophy. After numerous ballots, 36 in total, the House finally elected Jefferson as president on February 17, 1801. This election exposed flaws in the original electoral process. To prevent future ties like this one, Congress passed the 12th Amendment in 1804, which required electors to cast separate ballots for president and vice president, a reform that clarified voting procedures and strengthened democratic stability. Jefferson's victory marked a peaceful transfer of power from one political party to another, a milestone known as the Revolution of 1800. It demonstrated that American voters could change leadership without violence or upheaval, a vital test for democracy. Jefferson himself famously called it the most complete revolution in American history, because it signified a shift from Federalist policies toward greater emphasis on states' rights and individual freedoms. Jefferson's presidency ushered in significant changes. He aimed to reduce federal power by cutting government spending, eliminating unnecessary military forces, and repealing laws like the Alien and Sedition Acts. He also sought to promote an agrarian vision of America, an economy rooted in farming rather than industry or commerce. Despite these changes, Jefferson faced challenges such as maintaining neutrality amid European conflicts, notably between Britain and France, and managing internal divisions within his own party. His administration also dealt with issues like expanding westward settlement through treaties with Native American tribes. The election of 1800 set important precedents for American democracy. It confirmed that political power could change peacefully through elections. It highlighted the importance of clear electoral procedures, and it underscored the significance of political parties in shaping policy debates. In summary, the election of 1800 was a defining moment that tested America's democratic institutions, but ultimately reinforced them. It demonstrated that even amidst fierce partisan rivalry and constitutional crises, peaceful transfer of power was possible, an essential foundation for enduring democracy. This election not only reshaped leadership, but also helped solidify principles that continue to underpin American politics today.
Chapter 10. End of Presidency and Retirement. The conclusion of Thomas Jefferson's presidency marked a significant turning point in American history, symbolizing both the peaceful transfer of power and the consolidation of democratic principles that would define the young nation. Jefferson's 2 terms in office, from 1801 to 1809, were characterized by efforts to reduce federal power, expand westward exploration, and promote an agrarian vision for America. As his presidency drew to a close, Jefferson prepared to step down from the highest office in the land and enter a new chapter of his life dedicated to personal pursuits, scholarship, and public service. Throughout his presidency, Jefferson faced numerous challenges. He inherited a nation still grappling with partisan divisions, international conflicts, and domestic issues such as economic development and Native American relations.
His administration worked diligently to implement policies that reflected his ideals, reducing the national debt through budget cuts, eliminating unnecessary military expenditures, and repealing laws like the Alien and Sedition Acts that he believed threatened civil liberties. One of Jefferson's most notable achievements was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. This monumental land acquisition doubled the size of the United States at the time, securing control over New Orleans and vast territories west of the Mississippi River. The purchase was made from France under Napoleon Bonaparte for $15 million, a deal that exemplified Jefferson's vision of an expanding agrarian republic. Although it raised constitutional questions about presidential authority to acquire new territory without explicit constitutional approval, Jefferson justified it as a necessary step for national growth. During his presidency, Jefferson also prioritized exploring these new lands. The most famous expedition was the Lewis and Clark expedition, 1804 to 1806, which aimed to chart unknown territories, establish American presence in the West, and seek routes to the Pacific Ocean. Led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, this journey provided invaluable geographic and scientific knowledge about the continent's interior and fostered relationships with Native American tribes.
Despite these accomplishments, Jefferson's presidency was not without difficulties. Tensions with Britain persisted over maritime rights and impressment of American sailors. The ongoing conflict between Britain and France threatened American neutrality. Jefferson responded with policies like the Embargo Act of 1807, an attempt to pressure Britain and France by halting all American exports. However, this law backfired economically, hurting American merchants more than foreign nations and leading to widespread dissatisfaction. As Jefferson approached the end of his second term in 1809, he began planning for retirement from public life. He had long been passionate about scholarship, architecture, agriculture, and education, interests that he now intended to pursue more fully. He returned to Monticello, the estate he designed in Virginia, where he dedicated himself to reading, writing, gardening, and overseeing his plantation. Jefferson's retirement was also marked by continued engagement in political debates through correspondence with friends and former colleagues. He remained an influential figure within the Democratic-Republican Party, but avoided active involvement in partisan politics during this period. His writings continued to shape ideas about democracy, states' rights, education reform, notably advocating for public schooling, and religious freedom. In addition to managing Monticello's estate, Jefferson devoted considerable time to his personal library, an extensive collection that would later form the foundation of what became the Library of Congress after his death. His love for learning persisted throughout his retirement. He believed education was vital for maintaining a healthy republic. Jefferson's later years were also marked by health issues. He suffered from various ailments, including migraines and other chronic conditions, that sometimes limited his activities but never diminished his intellectual curiosity or commitment to public service ideals. Thomas Jefferson's retirement culminated in one final act of public service, serving as a diplomat in France during President James Madison's administration, 1809 to 1812. Although he was no longer president himself, he continued representing American interests abroad until health or age prompted him to withdraw from active diplomacy. Jefferson's legacy as a statesman was firmly established by this point. His leadership helped shape early American democracy, championing liberty, republicanism, education reform, and set precedents for peaceful transfers of power that remain central to U.S. politics today. In summary, Thomas Jefferson's end of presidency period was characterized by reflection on achievements, such as territorial expansion through the Louisiana Purchase and exploration via Lewis and Clark, efforts to reduce government overreach, navigation through international tensions, and a transition into retirement filled with scholarly pursuits at Monticello. His departure from office exemplified democratic stability, a peaceful handover that reinforced foundational principles of American governance and allowed him to dedicate himself anew to personal interests that would influence generations to come. Chapter 11. Legacy and Historical Significance. Thomas Jefferson's legacy is one of profound influence on the development of the United States, shaping its political institutions, cultural ideals, and territorial boundaries. As one of the founding fathers, his contributions laid the groundwork for American democracy, individual rights, and expansionism. Over time, Jefferson's impact has been examined through various lenses: his ideals, achievements, contradictions, and the enduring relevance of his ideas. Jefferson's most enduring legacy is his role as a champion of liberty and republicanism. He articulated these principles most famously in the Declaration of Independence, which he authored in 1776. The document proclaimed that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This declaration not only justified American independence, but also became a universal symbol of human rights and democratic aspirations worldwide. Jefferson's emphasis on individual freedoms and limited government influenced the development of American political philosophy and inspired future generations to uphold these ideals. In addition to his ideological contributions, Jefferson was instrumental in shaping the physical and territorial expansion of the United States. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 was a pivotal moment that doubled the nation's size and opened vast lands for settlement and economic development. This acquisition embodied Jefferson's vision of an agrarian republic, an America composed largely of independent farmers who would sustain its democratic fabric. The Lewis and Clark expedition further exemplified this expansionist spirit by mapping uncharted territories and establishing American presence across the continent. Jefferson's advocacy for education also left a lasting imprint. He believed that an informed citizenry was essential for a functioning democracy. His efforts to promote public education, most notably through his support for establishing universities like the University of Virginia, reflected his conviction that knowledge was vital for personal liberty and national prosperity. His ideas about education as a means to cultivate virtue and civic responsibility continue to influence American educational